Hello there, welcome to Music Ally Focus with me, Music Ally's editor Joe Sparrow. And in this episode, we're joined by Mag Rodriguez, who's CEO of Even, which is a direct-to-audience platform that encourages fans and artists to connect, buy things through, for example, pre-release sales or through exclusive experiences and things that bring artists and fans closer together. So we wanted to talk to him about that kind of way of working in the current music industry. Direct to fan is a model that most artists of all sizes now want to do. So how do you leverage your fandom through this direct to fan approach, even if you're a new artist who doesn't have an enormous fan base? What about the data? How can fans use the data that's generated by these platforms to do that job better? And what about the state of being thoughtful when you connect to your superfans and not milking them dry for every penny that they have? Mag answers all of these questions and more. So let's go over to the conversation right now. Well, I'm very happy to be joined by Mag Rodriguez, CEO and founder of Even. Welcome to the Focus Podcast.
Thanks, Joe. I really appreciate it. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, good to see you. Now, before we dig into all this, can you just give us a little bit of the basics, the background? Who are you? What do you do? And how did you get here?
Yeah, my name's Mag Rodriguez. I'm the CEO and founder of Even. I've been working in music for too long. No, I've been working in music for about 12 plus years. I started off as an engineer, producer, and then made my way to become a manager. I think that's usually the trajectory. Yep. I did that for 6 years. I just got lucky. Two of my classmates were incredible artists. One of them signed to Epic Records my junior year of high school, and my senior year of high school, I started managing another one of my classmates, and that became my main client. And then I built a roster of songwriters, producers, and then in 2018, 6 years after graduating high school, I started working for a venture fund. So I started working for a company called Generator. They were really interested in taking the Y Combinator model, but introducing it to artists and managers. So that took me on a completely different journey, working with artists and managers, but more on startup setting, essentially incubating them.
Did that model work? Sorry to interrupt, but it's one of those ideas I hear pop up every now and again. Did it work as a model?
It worked really well. So it was through a partnership with Universal Capital Motown. It was called the Motown Accelerator Program in Detroit. It was called Backline in Milwaukee, and it was called the Cleveland Accelerator in Cleveland. So this was pre-pandemic, and in many cases we had a lot of great success. This was all community funded, so we weren't making investments in exchange for equity. We were writing grants. So we awarded a little bit over $700,000 in grants to artists. Some of these artists, went on to become highly successful. I think that in that incubator alone, those artists, through the 3 years that we ran the program, we did about 500-600 million streams.
Okay.
So that was really my introduction to what now has become Even. So on one side, I was working with artists that had, millions of monthly listeners on Spotify and the DSPs. But on the other side, I started involving myself on the tech side, on the investment side. So I was essentially directly working with startups that were generating hundreds and thousands of dollars with a couple of thousand customers. And I remember having a conversation with a founder who mentioned, man, you're working with this artist with millions of followers. They must be making real money. And I was like, actually, they're struggling to pay their bills. Meanwhile, this company was getting acquired for hundreds and millions of dollars, and they only had a couple of thousand, I think under 100,000 customers. So that was really kind of the introduction of why is it that artists are the most influential people on the planet, but they aren't selling their number one product, which is their music.
How did that take you then to where you are now with Even? You've taken sort of experience from both sides of the financial coin, if you like. You've got the investment side and also the artist side. So how have you balanced that at Even then?
Yeah, so after 5 years of working for the fund, one of the last main things that I worked on the fund is I helped with a music tech accelerator that we operated outside of the Capitol building with Universal. Mm-hmm. It was called the G-Beta Music Tech Program. where we would incubate, again, no investment, just working and incubating music tech startups. And that was really my introduction to music tech. And there was a constant theme that I found. A lot of the startups that we were helping were founders who had never worked in the music industry before, had never actually directly had experience with developing, incubating, and seeing kind of the journey of an artist
Yeah.
from the beginning all the way till they're highly successful. And as a joke, one of the co-founders of Generator was like, "Man, you should just build your own company." And it started off as a joke. I wrote a white paper. I sent it to the founders of Generator, and they basically wrote me a check. That was my initial investment, and they kept me on salary for a year to start building Even. So that
God, you
was
had to
really,
do it. Yeah.
yeah. So this was the end of 2021. I transitioned out of my role. I was a managing director at Generator, and I transitioned into just building Even February of 2022. And we launched our MVP in October of 22 with La Russell, French Montana, Destin Conrad as our initial case studies. So yeah,
So explain to us in a nutshell then, for people that aren't familiar, what Even does. Because there's so many platforms out there, people get quite platform blind. So what does it even does and how does it work?
Even is very straightforward. We are a direct to consumer or direct to fan platform. I think when we just simplify it, but the way I describe this to my mom is think of Even like the movie theater if Spotify was Netflix. So artists are releasing on Even anywhere between 7 to 30 days before the wide release of a single album, EP, mixtape, you name it. And fans have to actually pay per unit to actually listen to the music. Now, in many cases, this is not a digital download. It's not Even or streaming, it's Even and streaming. So they essentially get this windowed access to an album that they had to pay for. And then when it officially releases on streaming platforms, the campaign ends and we push the fans to the streaming platforms.
Right. Now, of course, direct to fan, direct to consumer is a lot of attention is being spent or wasted maybe at the moment on artificial intelligence in its various forms. But actually, when you talk to artists and teams, the thing they're really, really interested in is direct to fan relationships, because what you just said, they can see the path to income, they own the data, they have power, it's all these really desirable things from an artist's perspective. So you were sort of explaining there that it's about fans paying for access. I know there's more to it than that, but how does Even, in a sort of more nuanced sense, leverage that fandom in that direct to fan, direct to customer approach?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that has to do with the way that we positioned Even. A lot of our early success up to this point, because it's still very early, and I think even in like this super fan direct, I think a lot of people are still trying to figure it out. Granted, we've been doing it for a little bit over 2 years, so we have a lot of data now. I have done thousands of campaigns as well. But what's really unique and interesting about the way we do things at Even is we don't want to create extra work for artists, teams, labels, distributors that we partner with. We take an existing campaign and we develop the Even campaign to be a complement to the strategy instead of this extra work, right? Traditionally, when we think about direct to fan, it feels like work. Now, there is work associated with it, but for example, just this morning I did a call with a team and they're like, we want to go live on Even 2 weeks before streaming platforms. The album comes out on streaming platforms the second week of October. We want to go live the first week of October. So our initial questionnaire is like, do you have any music videos that you're going to be releasing? Is there a tour? Do you have any merchandise? Just kind of go down of like, what do you already have prepared? And then we develop their campaign around it. So when fans come to Even, they come for the music, but they stay for everything else. So everything else can look like a community chat. It can be early access to tour tickets. It could be early access to merch. It could be memorabilia, right? I'm going to give one fan this jacket that I wore in the music video who buys the album. But it could be less traditional things too. This is where it gets exciting. We've seen artists do fans who pay over $50 get a follow back on Twitter.
Right.
I'm calling every fan who buys my album in the next 2 hours, right? Like artists can get really creative. And a lot of times do things that cost them no money, but maybe a little bit of time to create that engagement.
Right.
And then, of course, now I think one of the biggest value props is we're the only superfan app in the marketplace. Their reports to Illuminate, which fuels the Billboard charts, and now also the official charts in the UK as well. Not sure if we're the first in the official charts. I'll have to fact check that one.
Yeah.
But I think that's primarily for our bigger, like top 1% of artists, with some of those campaigns going out before the end of the year. That Billboard chart eligibility is really important because it's one-to-one sales.
I was going to say, then from a fan perspective, what's this like? Do they need to download an app, or is it browser based? Can it live through social media, through the artist's existing channels? What's the interaction like?
Yeah, so the experience for Even is really designed. Honestly, my initial metric of success when building Even is, will this be easier than a pre-save?
Right.
I don't know if you've ever pre-saved a song, but it's
Yeah.
probably one of the most annoying things to do. Not only on the business side as like a manager or an artist, right? Trying to get people to pre-save is kind of like, what's in it for them? And also
Yeah,
what's in it for me? Now on the fan side, pre-saving a song is also kind of tedious and there's no reward at the end of it. And traditionally we were timing it. Pre-saving a song can take anywhere between 3 to 5 minutes, depending on where you click on the link. With us, we get fans from A to Z in under 2 minutes. So what that means is they see it on social media. The artist says, hey, I have this new release, but you need to get it from me before you get it anywhere else. Fans click the link in bio or the link in whatever platform. And from there, they enter their email, they pay in their preferred method, in their preferred currency, and then they're accessing the content, whether it's the web browser where they actually purchased it or on the mobile app if they choose to download it. So as a platform, we're mobile app second in the sense that we don't push fans to download the app during purchase.
Yeah.
We want to remove all of that friction. Now, after they're bought in, they buy the release, they can choose to download the app on iOS or Android.
I'm just thinking then about the types of fans that this is positioned at before we talk about the artists. These are fans of the, maybe not super fans, but they're strong fans to super fans, I would guess, of the artist. So what sort of information and connectivity do you then give to the artists as a result of that?
Yeah, well, I think to start with the initial point that you were mentioning is like, who is this for fans at least? Like, what is the makeup of the fans that are buying releases? We have now hundreds and thousands of fans who bought releases on the platform. And one of my hot takes in the industry has been, some people don't agree with it, I think, when I talk about it publicly, is the music industry is getting super fans wrong, or just fans in general wrong. Traditionally in the industry, we've been conditioned to think of just the two opposite sides of the spectrum, right? Super fans and passive listeners, that we often forget the dozen archetypes of consumers that exist in the middle. And that's really the biggest base of Even. Our two biggest consumers on Even are the conscious consumer. These are, for the most part, when we think about Europe, North America, and even our regions of Latin America and Asia, these are people who care about where their food comes from, where their clothes come from, and they're intentional in the way that they spend their money. These make up about 40% of our consumers. These are people who feel good about the fact that they're supporting an artist because general knowledge is pretty clear that artists aren't making enough money from streaming. And then the other 40%, which is our second biggest segment of fans that are buying releases on the platform, are the frivolous spender. And that feels like a naughty word in many ways, but these are the people who are on DoorDash, Uber Eats, Amazon. As long as there's Apple Pay, Google Pay, where it's easy and simple for me to buy something, and there's kind of like this serotonin boost that happens, or dopamine boost. That's what we're focusing on as well. So traditionally, these are people who don't want to wait. This is available now. I click the link in bio. It doesn't feel like I'm spending my money, and I get a reward at the end of it. And then, of course, we have the experience seekers. They're a very small percentage. These are people who care about the virtual release parties, the community chat. And then the smallest segment are what we traditionally would consider a super fan. These are the I need everything that the artist has.
Yeah. Can I talk to you about that then? Because this is a really interesting point, which is where the director fan and super fan sort of meets, which is, it's clear that the super fans in this instance are the whales. They're spending the bulk of the money. They are, putting a lot of money per capita into this artist. Now, you mentioned at the beginning there, you were saying that, the industry gets super fandom wrong or gets fandom wrong in that sense. I would sort of be interested in you expanding on that a bit, because I think my take, spicy hot take, is that the super fans are being used as a sort of a money tap, a money faucet, in that they're seen as just this bottomless well of, hey, well, if we release 10 versions of the vinyl, they'll buy 10, which it feels it feels a bit grubby, to, you're going to kill the goose that lays a golden egg here, it feels like. So how can you expand on how you feel about superfans and how even is used in a way that feels fair from the artist fan perspective, but also gives artists what they want, which is money, and gives fans what they want, which is whatever the fans want?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think again, it gets really interesting because we also, when we think about fans, again, we think about it kind of from like 10,000 feet, perspective of like fans, and everyone's technically a fan, right? We try to segment it a little bit more around, simple stuff like Gen Z versus millennial, right? There's a lot of reports that are going out just in traditional consumer behavior that Gen Z is spending the most out of any other generation on paywalls. So we're thinking about, if something's not free, they're willing to pay for it. And I think the number was like north of $200 a month. And this is stuff like Roblox,
Right.
Fortnite, subscriptions on the internet, right? There is this new generation that's entering now the ages of early to mid 20s that now has a little bit more income, but it's more FOMO. FOMO has never existed at this kind of level because the internet made it feel like everything was accessible to us. So
Yeah.
that's what we focus on. It's like, how do you create something so compelling that people don't want to wait? And outside of not waiting, they don't want to miss out on.
Can you give me an example of that? That's quite interesting. That generationally, I'm of a, as you can see, I'm not a Gen Z person, and
Yeah,
I sort of bridged the gap between the old industry and the new industry, and then the shock of the new was, hey, everything is unlimited and everything's free, and there's no FOMO because everything is out there, right? And
everything.
obviously, this is not the case anymore. But when you say they're interested in experience, what I'm interested in that, because one of the data points we're seeing about Gen Z is that they are behaving in very different ways to perhaps your or my generation. I'm assuming you're also not Gen Z.
I'm a millennial.
I don't want to offend your sensibilities, but they're spending money in different ways. They're socializing less quite often. The data is pointing out they're doing things when they go out to gigs. The bars take less money because they're not drinking so much alcohol. That kind of thing. So obviously their parameters are different, and they've grown up in a completely digital online environment. So what are these experiences that are so meaningful to them that they're handing the money over?
It varies. It depends on the experience that they're looking for,
Mm.
right? And it also depends on the artist. When we think, taking it back to like how Even works, right? We have releases on the platform where a big segment of the consumers are more tiered towards Gen Z, and those fans that are purchasing on the platform can be for just the music. There's releases that we have where it's like the music is so impactful for that artist, where they just don't want to wait. We have other artists where the music isn't necessarily the deciding factor, it's the experiences around it. Some examples of that is like a virtual concert, right? We have artists on the platform that might have some restrictions around touring, right? They can't go to certain regions, or maybe they can't come to the States because of
Mm.
visa issues, but they can do a campaign on Even and monetize to a global audience all in real time. And I think that's been one of the big value props, that we support 140 currencies. We have users in 190 countries. We support languages from around the world, where fans at real time can come in and access something that traditionally has never been positioned. One of the things that I talk about pretty often is when iTunes launched in 2000, early 2000s, it only launched in a handful of countries. When we think about digital commerce today, people can buy the same thing no matter where they are in the world, as long as it's accessible to those people.
Mm.
Globalization is a trend that's happening across every other industry except for the music industry. The music industry is barely trying to keep up. And I mean, that's for another conversation of like
Mm.
how the music industry adopts technology. But it's one of the biggest opportunities that we're seeing. We have releases that go live on the platform, and we have a chart of, I think, one of our releases had purchases across 80 countries around the world, And this wasn't a global superstar. This was just an artist with a couple 100,000 followers, but they had fans from around the world that wanted to buy, but traditionally they weren't allowed to. So that's primarily the segment that we're focusing on. And when we also think about, Gen Z, millennials, etc., we also have to think about the trends from across different regions. What someone wants to buy in New York is completely different than what someone wants to buy in Berlin or South Africa or Mexico City or Sao Paulo, Brazil, right? So I think understanding that there is a couple more, it's a little bit more complex when we think about the incentives. But the only thing that you can do is put it out to the world and see who receives.
It's really a balance between understanding who the artist is and what their value point from a fan perspective is, and understanding what fans want and joining the gap. So I guess it does put a lot of that emphasis of decision making on the artist and the artist team to get that right. But
and also
that's the way it is at the moment. You need to know.
Yeah, but also not overcomplicating it, right? Like this doesn't have to be super complex. People, as you know, right? People are very simple. People want something new that feels familiar, right? So it's really about combining that. We'll like stop a team at their when they start creating 13 different experiences in one campaign. Right. It's like you're going to overwhelm the consumer. Try to limit it. Our sweet spot is really 4 to 5 experiences max across a release, because it's also sustainable. We also don't want you to take business from another pocket of your business and bring it to Even. The intention of Even is to bring in a new type of revenue. So traditionally, we don't recommend artists to bring, their merch business to Even, right? Your merch business is your merch business. Treat your Even campaign as a funnel, because anyone who's willing to pay for access is willing to pay for merchandise. So it's more of a funnel instead of replacing, which again is more of a learning curve when we're talking to teams.
With such a sort of global view, I presume you've designed the platform that can be used by pretty much all artists, right? But is there a type of artist or a phase in their career where it doesn't work? I'm wondering, if you need existing fans, I'm wondering if this is something that perhaps emerging artists would leave till a later point in their career, for instance.
Well, if you would have asked me this question 4 months ago, 5 months ago, I would have told you Even's only for established artists, because up until April of this year, we were only working with established artists. During our beta phase, we were only working with middle to top tier artists. And then sometime in the spring, a DIY distributor reached out and they say, hey, we know you're partnering with distributors. We would love to partner and try this out with our segment of artists. So we did a case study with 20 artists. Every single one of these artists had under 25,000 monthly listeners, from 0 monthly listeners to 25,000 monthly listeners. And they all had a release coming up in a 2-week period in June. They released on the platform. Every single one of those artists generated over $1,000 on Even. None of these artists had ever generated over $1,000 from streaming. And this is from 1,000. I think the highest one was 13,000 that generated on the platform. And the thing that was really interesting, which we always knew, you don't need a lot of people to buy on Even to make money. Yeah. So the average release was selling about 55 units on the platform. So 55 people were buying and they were making $1,000. 55 people go listen to your album on a streaming platform, you're not even making $1. So that was really unique. And when we started asking questions to the end consumer, we did a case study around the people who actually purchased. What we found is these were friends, family, and immediate community around these artists, right? So traditionally, an artist, a local DIY artist, whether, no matter where they are in the world, they would tell their friends and family, hey, support my new album, listen to it on X platform. And they'll do that, but it ends there, right? Because you're doing your friend or family a favor, but now you tell them, hey, buy my album from me before it's, made available to the public. And they created a new segment for us that we have now continued to study, where one of those artists actually did a new release just last week on the platform. Their first release, I think they made $1,100 or something. The second release, months later, I think he's nearing 5,000 in revenue. So there's also kind of a trend. And when we're asking questions to the artist, how did you get to this point? his answer wasn't, I made this, $1,500 and pocketed. I spent those $1,500 running ads. I went to Symphony, I went to Breaker, I went to Groover, I went to all these platforms to get more exposure because traditionally I didn't have the money to invest into it. They grew their audience and then did another campaign on Even, quadrupled their money, and now they can continue. And what's interesting is like, this doesn't sound that complex when you think about how any other business in the world operates.
Yeah.
Right. So, to answer your question, Even is for all artists now,
Right.
but only all artists that want to work. Right. This is not snake oil. This isn't you upload to Even and you're just going to make money.
So it's not a passive experience in the artist end. It has to fit in with their workload and their approach.
Exactly.
What of those emerging artists? I'm interested in that because I can sort of understand from like a big established artist, they've got so many facets to they've got tours, they've got merchandise already made, they've got a team around them to help facilitate getting follow backs and things like that. But for an emerging artist, when time is tight, you're working with a very small team, if anything
If
at
any.
all, if any, right? It's probably one person and a laptop working really hard. What is the thing that they are, if you like, selling to generate that income? Is it just like get the album here first, or is there more to it than that?
So we have playbooks that we offer artists around like what's feasible for them. And again, following the same formula, it's just at a smaller scale, right? Traditionally, most artists have dreams of merchandise or
Yeah.
have thoughts of merchandise, or
Yeah.
maybe they're producing like very small runs of merchandise. So a lot of the stuff that we see primarily on the DIY space is like you get the album and select fans get a free t-shirt. Or
Right.
it's a lot of them are hosting events or like release parties in their local town or their local city. So they'll say buy the album and it includes a ticket to my release party, which
Right.
most times was a free event anyways, but they can like kind of package it into one. And then we're starting to see more unique experiences. We're seeing stuff like buy the album and you pay over X amount and I'll come perform this at
Right.
one of your events.
Yeah.
Right. So
Yeah.
again, I think it's kind of, it varies. I mean, we're doing about 200 plus releases a day within like the DIY sector. And every day we're studying like what's working, what's not working.
Right.
And I think it's been really interesting to see.
If you look ahead 5 to 10 years, what does success look like to Even in terms of the company? How do you put a figure or how do you pin that in the future? What does success look like? But then also, what does success look like in terms of if this becomes a model adopted by the wider music industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's been really interesting is I spend a lot of time just talking to our clients, right? Our immediate clients, for the most part, are distribution companies, record labels, whether big record labels, indie labels, management teams. And one of the thing that really stuck out and we started to kind of see over and over again, teams get excited about Even because they see it in as opportunity to grow their business by 10, 15, 20% in a calendar year. And that's being conservative, right? We also have artists and teams that are signed to a label who are maybe doing $10,000 a year from streaming, which is solid, right? For an emerging artist, come to Even and they make 40, 50,000 in the span of 6 months across various releases. Those teams get really excited. So a lot of this year right now has been maturing those partnerships with distributors and labels. But we've also been focusing on the fan experience and on the artist experience. We take so much pride in our NPS score. I talk about it too much, maybe. But we just reached an 88 on our NPS score in August, which was like our high. And if you're not familiar with NPS score, it's kind of, the measure of whether or not people are willing to refer a product or a service to their friends, colleagues, community. Traditionally, music experiences have had historically low NPS scores because it's mostly been focused on convenience, not really on a service that's being kind of given to the end consumer. So I think for us was like getting that number really high. Now we're doing the exact same thing with our labels, distributors, making sure that they have an enjoyable experience uploading, managing their campaigns, because Even is really designed to be a self-service tool. But when I think about the next 3 to 5 years, every 3 months, the business develops and evolves with the needs of our customers. I'll give you an example. since day one, we've been giving all of the fan data to our artists and label partners. This includes emails, phone numbers, demographics, consumption, referrals, you name it. All of the data is directly owned by our partners. Most teams have never had access like this before. So their first question is like, this is amazing. What do we do with it? So we started sending people to different platforms, like go over here or go over here to do this. And then very quickly it turned into, people are like, so I got to spend an extra $200 a month not to manage this data because I need all these different tools. So we put our heads down and we developed Fan Connect. So Fan Connect is one of our tools now that lives within Even. It's essentially a fan CRM where you can send SMS, WhatsApp, email notifications, streamlined through the platform in a way that makes sense for the music industry. And we're seeing incredible returns that artists are seeing just using the tool. If an artist generates 10,000 in revenue on a campaign on Even, they can now do a merch release targeting those fans directly who bought the release and make 20 to 30,000 in merchandise. And then, rinse and repeat over and over again. And we're taking artists from a 10,000 a year business to hundreds and thousands in revenue in a calendar year after they had access to their fan data plus Even.
What's your business model then? How do you make money?
So we take 20% of revenue on the platform. We don't take any revenue outside of, whatever they do with their data. That's a subscription model that unlocks some of these tools on the platform. It's still not public. It's still very much in a closed beta. We have 100 teams using some of these tools that we're developing, Fan Connect being one of the ones that we recently announced, but it's evolving beyond that. So that's really where Even's going in the next 3 to 5 years. Even will be an all-in-one tool for creators to own and manage their business while they're owning the relationship with their fans.
Right.
So
can I ask you about that as well? Because this is something which, this idea of not mediating the data, but collecting it and giving it, and you're giving all of it to them and they can just take it away off the platform and do what they want. So why did you do that? Because historically the music industry, let's say, has been a little bit reticent to share that information.
For that exact reason. It's not sustainable.
Right.
Every other industry is designed to be open source, right? And not that Even's an open source platform, but Even is designed to grow the pie. Even will only be successful if we grow the music industry's pie by 15 to 20% in the next 5 to 10 years. That to us is success. This is all new money. It's new revenue. This is money that if you don't do a release on Even, you're literally leaving money on the table. The value prop is so clear for artists and teams that once they see it, then it's, we're not outselling Even. For the most part, we're an inbound business. People will do a release and then all their friends come and they're like, we want to join Even.
Right.
But I think the most important reason why we give the data is we only make money when the artist makes money. And we want them to make money. And we want them to be successful. But I think everyone has talked about how the industry has operated for a long time. But there's kind of been this layer of fear of too much radical change that happens. And I wouldn't consider Even a radical platform, but when we say we hand over all the fan data, people think we're a radical business.
Well, I mean, that is slightly radical in the context of the music industry, isn't it? Yeah.
And when I think of Even, again, when I'm talking to a fan, I describe Even as the movie theater if Spotify was Netflix. When I'm talking to the industry, I tell them Even is what Shopify is to the consumer business, right? So when we think about physical products, what Shopify has done to just e-commerce in general, Even will do for the music industry and beyond. We're now onboarding podcasters, content creators, podcast networks are joining the platform, content networks are joining the platform. So it's evolving beyond just music. While music is the priority, it's really interesting to see how like content creators and podcasts, for the most part, they try to kind of run in the same circles of music, mostly because of the appeal and the network that comes with it. So it's been really interesting to see, how that evolves. But yeah, I think data is the key to unlock, successful businesses. And again, we're not bypassing, about 90% of our business is with distributors and labels directly. So it's also designed to incentivize the companies that fuel the music industry as well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I will link to Even so people can go and check it out and have a look at it for themselves. One final question then, Mag. We've talked a lot about releasing music, but let's talk about music as a final question. If you could only listen to one piece of music for the rest of your life, what would it be?
Um, Man, these days, honestly, I've been kind of like on a jazz kick. And to be honest, I was never a huge fan of jazz. I grew up playing the clarinet. Very random. I'm kind of
Mm.
upset I just said that out loud. But yeah, I was a great player, but jazz was kind of my weakness. So like I just kind of
Yeah.
like subconsciously didn't want to listen to it for a long time. But lately I think it's honestly what I work with. When I'm working, getting work done, I just kind of play it in the background. I can't name a list of jazz.
What is it? What is it about jazz then? Is it the sort of overt creativity, the fact that it's leaping around and doing interesting things? What is it?
I think the curiosity in the music is so interesting. It's like
Mm.
understanding the beginning and an end of a jazz song. It's like you're gonna give yourself. It's designed to be very complex, but also very easy to listen to as well. And it just kind of, I think the traditional music, because I've been so immersed in music for so long, where it's always like the same BPMs, the same, 4 bars every single time.
Yeah.
I think being able to remove myself from that allows me to think a little bit beyond just like what's, within the box that we're all kind of trying to fit ourselves in.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those forms of music that when I was younger, I swore I would never ever be interested in, and now here I am listening to it, thinking, "Wow, this is completely different. There's something going on here." So
Definitely.
maybe it's just a sign of I'm not going to say age. I'm going to say
I,
wisdom.
I turned 30 last week, so I think it is
Yeah,
that.
I'm significantly older than you, so I don't have much sympathy. But yes, I take your point. All right, Mag Rodriguez, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Joe. Appreciate it.
All right, that's it. Thank you again to Mag for joining us. And if you found that useful, please do share the podcast on with someone else who you think will get something out of it. I have put links to all the things he mentioned below the podcast. And if you want to get in touch with me, there's a link to that too. I'd love to hear from you. You can email me on joe@musically.com. We also have a free weekly email. You can stay in touch that way, called The Knowledge, which rounds up bits and pieces from across Music Ally's broad range of services, including marketing insight and skills. So sign up and impress your friends. And if you're the kind of person who enjoys using LinkedIn, you can find a cut down version of that newsletter available on LinkedIn as well. So that's it. Thanks for listening. I've been Joe Sparrow. You have been you. And until next time, farewell, friends.